Hello, and a very warm welcome to Classeek 15, our podcast home of top tips for young and emerging classical musicians. I'm Jack Pepper, I'm a composer and radio presenter, and for 15 minutes we get to have a virtual coffee with a star of the classical music world. Today we welcome Julian Lloyd Webber. He first found fame for his solo cello career. His recordings include a Brit Award-winning Elgar cello concerto conducted by Yehudi Menuhin. That recording was chosen by BBC Music magazine as the finest ever version of that piece. His playing has also inspired more than 50 new works for the cello, music by the likes of Rodrigo, Malcolm Arnold, Philip Glass and Eric Whittaker. Julian is also a leading voice in arts education, having been invited by the UK government to create the In Harmony programme for young people. Now that, alongside Systema England, which he chairs, has introduced music to more than 60,000 children in less privileged parts of England. An injury in 2014 forced Julian to retire from playing, but he has continued to be a hugely important voice in music, both as principal of the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire and, more recently, touring with his cellist wife Jiaxing in a series of narrated concerts. Well, Julian and I caught up on a video call, and I started by asking him to describe what he was like as a teenage music student.
Well, I'm glad when you said teenage, because I started playing cello when I was 4. There was a lot of music around in my family. My father was an organist and composer. My mother specialised in teaching children the piano, young children, and of course tried to start me, and that didn't work at all. I never liked the piano. Maybe it's not the best thing to learn with one of your parents, but I picked the cello out from an orchestral concert for children at the Royal Festival Hall in London. And I saw the cello there and I thought, this looks an interesting instrument to play. Having said that, when it arrived, it was a 10th size cello, so I was a bit disappointed, I wanted one of the huge things I'd seen at the Festival Hall, and that didn't happen. But I just played for fun. And that's why I said, it wasn't really till I was a teenager that I started taking it seriously. But I used to enjoy it. I played for fun, and I think that's really important. The whole business when you first learn an instrument, it should be fun. It shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be a job to be practicing. But it got to the point where I heard the great Russian cellist Rostropovich in London when I was, in fact, about 13. And it was a life-changing thing for me because I'd heard great cellists before, but he made the biggest impact. He made a huge impact on me. Just the whole way he played, his whole approach to the cello, it seemed completely soloistic. And it made me think, I want to do this myself, which is naivety, at that age, but I then became determined to do it. So I started working really hard. I knew that, technically I had a lot of work to do because I'd never taken the whole thing seriously. And I started practicing properly and working, I was still at school, obviously, but I would come back and not do my homework and just sit practicing the cello.
Is there a moment, though, it's interesting you speak about the sort of the fun then becoming the kind of the hard graft. Is there a moment when that transition becomes a bit like late, that moment of realization that you want to be a soloist, you want to be that star on that stage? Is there a moment where it's too late to have that moment of realization?
I don't know. I think if I'd left it any later, for me, it would have been too late because, as I say, I had technical work to do to catch up.
And how old were you at that point when you really started putting in the hours?
13, 14. And, some of my peers who would have been sent to specialist music schools and things would have been much more advanced. And I mean, if I'd listened to my teachers when I was 10, 11, 12, I'd have been more advanced. But so it was a decision that came from within. And I then decided I really wanted to do that and just practiced hard because I wanted to get better. And of course, the more you practice, the better you get, the more enjoyable the whole process becomes.
Was there anything that you feel looking back at those years you got wrong? Maybe a sort of a misunderstanding, a misperception? What would you say were your mistakes in your early years?
Well, very early years was simply that I didn't work hard enough because it was just fun. But when it got to that point, no, I think I worked really, really hard, did the right things. And when I actually had 1 year when I left school when I was 16, didn't have much in the way of any academic qualifications, I have to tell you. I mean, it used to make me really nervous because I thought, well, if I don't make it at this thing, I've got not much backup. And so then I had almost a year when I wasn't at school and I was studying with a wonderful teacher called Douglas Cameron. And I had private lessons with him and would just work at home on my own. And I would be doing 6, 7 hours a day then. And I stuck to that when I got to the college. I went to Royal College the year later when I was 17. And no, I think I tried to do the right things from the moment I decided that's what I wanted to do. I knew that I had to get on with that work.
And you've collaborated with such a wide range of people, composers as well, from Eric Whittaker to Rodrigo. Of all the people that you've worked with as a player, as a commissioner, who would you say has taught you the most? Who have you learnt a lot from in your professional collaborations?
I've learned a lot from all of those people you mentioned. Some people, not just on the classical side, working with someone like Stefan Grappelli, these people are at the top of their game. And if you know what you're doing as a collaborator, they will be great to work with. If you don't and you're not prepared, then quite rightly, they won't. Those kind of level people can be very difficult, very dismissive if you don't know what you're doing. The one I think was the most inspirational to me of all the people I've worked with was Yehudi Menuhin. I recorded Elgar Cello Concerto with him. He had worked with Elgar himself, and we toured that work really across the world, actually, with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And I found him totally inspirational because there would be chaos going on in the rehearsals, chaos on the flights and things cancelled and all that. He was always calm and sort of floating above it all. And I learned so much just from watching that. This is a man who'd been doing this since he was a child prodigy, and by that point he would have been late 60s, early 70s, maybe actually 70s. And he was so calm. I've got a story. Just before we were going on to play the Elgar in Sydney, I wanted to ask him something in the score. So I knock on his door, come in. And I open the door and find him standing on his head doing his yoga practice. So I thought, this is slightly awkward. I said to Yehudi, I've just got something I need to. Yes, all right. If you just come down on the floor and put the bit you're talking about in front of me, we can discuss it. And so there's this ridiculous scene of both of us, me prostrate on the floor and him standing on his head looking at an upside down score. And I just wish the audience could have seen that, But this was typical of the man. He wasn't going to disrupt his routine before the concert, but he was perfectly prepared to discuss the Elgar Cello Concerto standing on his head.
So how do you keep that, if you pardon the pun in the context, level head? How do you keep calm in, if you are touring, you're going around the world, your time zone's changing every other day, you're working with a very wide range of very big personalities as well. How do you keep that level head? How do you keep calm?
Well, I don't know that I did. I think you learn over time. And in the end, sometimes people say artists are difficult and all that. But you get a situation, or I had situations where I'd go somewhere like New Zealand, which is in those days was a massively long flight via Japan and all kinds of things. Or no, I think it was actually via Antarctica or somewhere. Anyway, you would get there utterly exhausted with literally a 13-hour time change. And you would say, I need a day built in one day, to recover. And they would start saying, actually, we've fixed this interview for you tomorrow. And, it's really important. It's vitally important to sell out the concert, And I would just, in the end, I'd just say, sorry, that's not the agreement. And so basically it's probably fed back, oh, that Lloyd Webber is so difficult, But actually you have to stick to certain things. Otherwise you can't play at your peak. And that's what you're there to do, isn't it?
Well, this routine, let's sort of touch on more recent years. This routine changed 10 years ago. Can you take us into what happened, the injury that forced you to stop playing?
Yes. Well, in the middle of a concert, and this was actually in October 2013, I suddenly felt this extraordinary feeling in my bowing arm that, I suddenly didn't have any power, and I almost could not hold on to the bow. It was you think of things in life. I would say that was a terrifying moment. I was in the middle of a concert. I couldn't hold my bow. It was something unknown to me, a feeling that I just never experienced. So I knew there was something really badly wrong. And actually, I had to go to the organizer in the interval and say, I'm not sure I can go on because I can't hold my bow. I mean, it's the most embarrassing thing that you could say. Anyway, next morning I was in a hospital talking to a surgeon and doing all the tests, all the things, and it turned out that I had a herniated disc in my neck, which is still pressing on a nerve, which is reducing the power to my right arm. Now, it's such a specialized injury, and I've always said this to people, I was not in pain. Of course, I get aches and pains in it, so does everyone, especially when you sort of over 60. I was not in pain, and basically the surgeons, I saw three, refused to do the operation because they said there are risks attached. We only do this if you're in pain. So I had to make a decision. I was doing lots of concerts with my wife then. We were on a tour called A Tale of Two Cellos, and it was quite, not say light in musically, but light playing, and I was able to get through that. But it got to the point in 2014 where I just knew I wanted to play all my repertoire. I loved Shostakovich Concerto. These dates were actually coming up for me, and I said, I can't do it. And I had to call it a day. I was not a cellist who just wanted to go around playing 30% of my repertoire, so very difficult decision, of course, and horrible time. But then soon afterwards, a year afterwards, so that wasn't a nice year, I was very fortunate to get the job as principal of Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. And I loved that. I absolutely loved it. I love working with the students. I still am loving and enjoying working with lots of young musicians, doing a program with Classeek FM and Sky Arts of Rising Stars, and we're on a third series now. So I'm very busy doing things I like doing, which is wonderful. But so I don't know quite how we got to this point, but it was a terrible moment, and you have to keep going. After all, I suppose I could have wallowed in self-pity. But what's the alternative? I still love music. I wanted to be involved with music. And the alternative is kind of not acceptable. It's not practical. I love music and I want to go on doing it. And I still do.
Was the injury related to your career? Had that come about because of playing lots, practicing lots? Was it related to music?
I mean, maybe the things I could have been told, like, because when you're playing cello, you tend to be looking down all the time. You're looking down at the instrument. Maybe I should have been told, after every practice session, after every concert, you need to hold your head up literally and look at the sky. I don't know. Maybe it's more like carrying heavy cellos and heavy suitcases. I'm sure finally somewhere there it was playing related because I've done it for so long, so many hours, and I'm sure it's something to do with it, but I'm not certain.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the sort of the next chapter and being at Birmingham as the principal. What would you say was the most common misunderstanding or mistake made by young musicians there? You touched at the beginning of sort of when you were a music student. What did you encounter in the music students that you've been working with in the last decade? What's the most common mistake?
That's a really good question, but I don't think it's the students themselves. I think it's the way that the attitude is. And I tried to change that from the day I moved in the building. And that is that you need to keep your eyes and ears open to other opportunities and to all the kinds of opportunities in the profession. It's not just about going in there and practicing, shutting yourself away in a practice room and practicing for 6 hours a day. You need to spend half an hour a day thinking of what or more maybe, of what possibilities are out there for you. And a lot of the people I know who've been most successful in music have done things that they didn't think they would be doing when they first went in. So I'm talking about someone who perhaps was learning the piano, finds themselves not to be a concert pianist, but to be a record producer, or to be working in what you're doing now, radio, all these kind of things. There's a wide range in the music profession. I know some people who've been incredibly successful as music managers and things who've gone into all other areas. So keep your options open. And that's the thing that I said to my students from day one. And a lot of them already have gone on to be successful in lots of different ways.
So just finally, what would be the best next step for somebody listening now, a young musician, a music student, something they could do practically in the next few weeks to make that step towards a goal? What's the most important thing to keep in mind, the most important thing to do in the short term?
You must be open-minded. And I think it is easier in a way today. There's so much information out there on the internet, and just a few little searches, just think, perhaps if I don't make it in what I want to do. And there's no saying that somebody isn't going to, but the option of, okay, what else am I interested in? Keep yourself interested in different things. Read a bit, read what's going on in the world, and see what avenues could be open to you, because we all know the music profession is extremely crowded. So you need to have ways that perhaps, and we're talking about people studying to be professional musicians now, the way you could use your love of music, and that's really important to use that word love, because that's something you must never let go, because it is a tough profession. If you don't love it, you're not going to succeed in it, because you have to put a lot of other distractions and worries and everything aside because you love that music so much. And as I say, there's many ways you can make a living in music, not just by playing, but playing, of course, is great. But just keep your options open and keep looking and keep curious. That's what I would say.
Julian Lloyd Webber, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jack.
And big thanks to you for joining us. This episode of Classeek 15 and all in the series are available on the usual podcast platforms and online at classeek.com. On that website, you'll also find all of Classeek's latest news, opportunities, their online concert series, and sparkling video on demand. And do follow at Classeek Music on social media for the very latest. Thanks for listening, and hope to chat again soon.